Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Pulse podcast. I'm your host, Rosie Nishanian. My guest today is Chris Bohjalian. Based in Vermont, Chris is a New York Times best-selling author of over 20 books. His work has been selected by Oprah's Book Club and named to several publications' Best Books of the Year lists. His books have even been adapted into movies and TV shows, including The Flight Attendant, starring Kaylee Cuoco. And his brand new novel, The Amateur, is available now at your favorite booksellers. Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Rosie, great to speak with you.
Why don't we get started with, when did you know you first wanted to be a writer?
I have wanted to be a writer since the Mesozoic era. When my father died and I was cleaning out his home, I came across a sweater box under the bed, and in it were all of these short stories I'd written when I was 8 and 9 and 10 years old that my mother had saved, and then after she died, my father had saved. Stories about disembodied hands that emerged from wishing wells and sibling rivalry on the school safety patrol. So I have wanted to write clearly forever.
I love that. That's a beautiful story.
My parents were beautiful people. They were.
I think a lot of young writers, especially, they think they don't have something to say or that no one will care about what they write. So when you were a young writer and growing up, how did you gain that confidence to know that you did have something to say and the courage to put it out into the world?
What a great question. I think I was well served by the fact that the frontal lobe takes a long time to develop. So I was awash in hubris. I had no idea how talentless I was. I had no idea how much work I had to do. I just blithely kept on writing, amassing rejection slips, and going on my way quite contentedly, convinced that eventually it would all work out.
That's really great advice. So if anyone out there thinks maybe you don't have talent, just keep going. Just keep at it.
Well, the other thing I do tell young writers all the time is this: write because you love it. Write in whatever genre you love to read. Write because it makes you happy. I used to get up at 5, I used to write from 5 to 7 a.m. in the mornings before going to work at ad agencies. First in New York City, and then in Burlington, Vermont. And I didn't get up at 5 in the morning because I thought, gosh, someday you're going to write the great American novel. I got up to write because it made me happy. It gave me pleasure.
I feel like for any kind of artistic or creative pursuit, you're really doing it because you love it and it brings you joy, it brings you happiness, and it's a passion. Even outside of any other normal work that you're doing, you're still pursuing that because you have to.
I love the way you just used the word passion. That is precisely the right word, I think. I mean, I love riding my bike. I mean, the minute we are done with this conversation, I've already got my bike clothes on. I'm going to go for a bike ride. But I would never get up at 5 in the morning to ride my bike.
Do you enjoy watching cycling? Are you watching the Tour de France right now?
No, I feel really guilty. I don't watch cycling.
That's
and I'm
totally
really
fine.
a serious bicyclist. I mean, I bike 3,500 miles every summer here in Vermont. Likewise, I wrote The Amateur, which is about a young woman who wants to be an LPGA golfer. And I don't watch golf. I used to caddy. I caddied for many summers. But, the only spectator sports I watch religiously, I don't even watch it religiously, I listen to it religiously, is baseball. Because baseball is a sport designed to listen to while you are doing other things. There's nothing better for me to fold laundry to than listening to a baseball game.
That's true. Who's your team?
Tragically, the Mets.
I'm sorry. I'm a Cubs fan. I'm originally from Chicago, so I love going to Citi Field over here like once a year for the Cubs-Mets series. And honestly, the Cubs often sweep the Mets, and it's a wonderful feeling as a Cubs fan, but I do feel bad for my neighbors.
No, it's absolutely fine. The Cubs are a great story year in and year out.
Exactly.
Whether it's Bill Murray singing in the 7th inning stretch at Wrigley Field. I mean, everything about the Cubs is gold.
It is. It's fun. The lovable losers. It's very fun to be a fan, even when they're not winning.
And you've seen Will Ferrell do his imitations of Harry Carey, right?
Yes.
It's
so good on
great.
SNL. Yeah. Oh my gosh, such a character. So a little bit more about your writing. You are both a novelist and a playwright. So what do you see are the biggest similarities and differences between novels and plays as a storytelling medium?
Playwriting is so collaborative. When I'm writing a novel, for example, The Amateur, I wrote it in a 90-day alchemic frenzy in this room, and not a soul in the world except for one person, the lawyer who was helping me understand how the litigation would work, knew what I was writing. Not even my wife,
Wow.
our daughter, my editor, my agents, none of them knew. A play is different. I've written, I think, 4 plays, 3 that have actually been produced, and I write them in this room, but then I go into the rehearsal room with the cast, and we literally spend 2 weeks as I'm listening to them and rewriting, and often listening to how they believe their character would say a line of dialogue. Same with the director. The director, because these are all world premieres, will have a similar opportunity to weigh in and give his or her their advice on what, based on their experience, they think should happen.
Interesting. Do you have any background in acting or being on stage that helps you relate to the actors at all?
No. I mean, I was in high school plays, but how bad and talentless was I clearly? When I was a senior in high school, we had a new drama teacher, and we were doing Hello Dolly, and I had to do my singing audition. And after I did my singing audition, the drama teacher laughed and said, okay, I get it. You're pulling my leg. Really sing this time. And I said, I really did sing. And he said,
Oh no.
come on. Now, he was a really nice guy, and he was clear about this. You don't belong on stage, but you like this, so how would you like to be my assistant director?
Oh wow. That's great. That's a great redirection. Like that's a great educator in finding where the passion is. I was also in some school plays, but I refused to be anything other than the narrator. I had my script in front of me. I could read from that. I didn't have to act. I didn't have to memorize lines. That was my acting career.
Well, we both channeled our energies in more appropriate directions for who we are.
Exactly. And you touched on it a little bit. Writing novels, like a lot of writers said that's a very lonely process because you're just kind of by yourself in the room, as you said. So how do you kind of create or nurture a community around you with others on the journey with you, like writing groups or, discussing with other writers or even family members? How do you build that?
Yeah. I do have writer friends who are lonely. I'm not. I am actually an unbelievable introvert. I can turn it on publicly. And I love being out there at book tours and meeting readers. But I am fundamentally an introvert who is really content to hang around in my library, to hang around the house and the property with my lovely bride, Victoria, to hang around with our daughter when she's visiting, to ride my bike, to run in the woods with my dog. I have friends, and I have friends who are writers, but I'm not part of a writer's group. I depend for feedback on a very select, small group of people, such as, obviously my lovely bride has read every single one of the 3.8 million words I've published before they were published. Our daughter Grace Experience has become a very important reader to me. And of course, I have my editor going back to 2010, Jenny Jackson, who is also a brilliant novelist whose new book this summer, The Shampoo Effect, is just an absolute treasure and is becoming one of the big books of the summer.
Oh wow, I have to check that out. But that's great. That's really great that you have the support system, both with writers, but then also outside of that and people that you really trust.
Yeah.
So what tells you when you have an idea? What tells you that it would work best as a book or a play or maybe a movie at some point or that kind of a thing?
Every time I have written a play, I knew instantly it was a play. And that's what I want. I have an idea that this is a play. This is not a novel. And it's only happened 4 times. I sometimes think I'm really, really presumptuous and a narcissist to say I'm a playwright when I've only written 4 plays, only 3 of which have actually been produced. But each one of those plays I knew instantly when I had the idea, this is a play and it'll be really, really fun. For example, my play Wingspan began as a 1-act play at 59 East 59 in Manhattan called Grounded. And it was directed by the wonderful part Armenian-American director Alexander Dinelaris, who's known for such amazing movies as Birdman, and he's got a new movie coming out this fall called Digger, starring Tom Cruise. But Alexander Dinelaris directed Grounded. And I knew this was going to be a play from the minute I had the idea. 2 flight attendants, one very experienced, the other a relative newbie who is terrified of flying. And what the play will unravel is why in the world is somebody who's got an unbelievable fear of flying a flight attendant? What's really going on? And it begins as a comedy, and you think it's really funny, but it gets darker and darker and darker. And all my plays are like that. Even Midwives, to a certain extent, begins a little bit funny compared to how unbelievably dark it gets by the end of Act 1.
So you mentioned Midwives, so let's go there. So several of your books have actually been made into movies or TV shows, including Midwives, Secrets of Eden, Past the Bleachers, and The Flight Attendant most recently with Kaylee Cuoco. So when you first had those story ideas, did you envision them on the screen? Could you see them being made into movies or TV shows?
I love movies. I love TV. I am so happy in movie theaters. I'm so happy watching cool streaming stuff. But when I'm writing a book, I am really focused on the text. I'm not thinking about, would this work as a movie, or what should I do differently to make it work better as a movie? A good case in point would be my novel, The Guest Room, about a young woman from Yerevan who's abducted by Russian traffickers and brought to New York City. That is got a lot of attention as a possible TV series. But all of the streamers, everyone we pitched it to, needed a different ending. And
interesting.
That wasn't going to happen. Not because I'm such a stick in the mud and so intransigent, or that I believe my work is so perfect as it is, because God knows I don't, but because it meant that all the streamers would have to reimagine the books themselves in certain ways. And so it never, ever happened. When I was writing The Guest Room, if I'd been thinking TV series, I would have had to end the book very differently, and I would have been really dissatisfied with what the ending was. I've been really, really fortunate. I love what the producers did with the 3 of my books that became movies. I mean, they did beautiful work, and my gosh, everything that HBO and Warner and Kaylee Cuoco and the showrunner Steve Yockey did with The Flight Attendant, I think is an absolute treasure. I could watch that TV series a lot and always be surprised at how smart everyone in the TV community is.
Did you ever think about becoming a screenwriter and writing for movies or TV shows?
Not when I was coming up in my career, no. I viewed myself first and foremost and entirely as a novelist. Now, since in the last 6 years, I've written 2 TV pilots at the request of other people, neither of which went anywhere, which is absolutely fine. I totally get it. But I had fun writing them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a different structure, it's a different way of telling a story and things to think about, which is so interesting to try out different kinds and see kind of, especially for younger writers as you're just starting out, like see what speaks to you. What's the thing that is going to work for you?
And given the fact that I am responsible for the single worst first novel ever published, bar none, clearly whatever I do demands a learning curve. And it's possible that I need to write 3 or 4 more pilots before I really know how to do it.
You know, I've seen you post about that on Instagram. What is telling you that it was the single worst first novel?
Every time I pick up the book and open to any page in it, I cringe. It's badly plotted. It is badly written. Nothing about it works as a work of fiction. The prose is horrific. The only reason why it sold is this. It was the late 1980s, the era of Jay McInerney's Bright Lights, Big City, Bret Easton Ellis's Less Than Zero, Tamajano, Slaves of New York. If you write a novel with young people in LA or New York or Chicago behaving badly and doing too much cocaine, it's going to sell. In 1988, I literally could have given my agent a grocery list with 3 items on it: cat food, cookies, cocaine, and she would have sold it.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. That's a great glimpse into an era.
It is. It was quite the era.
So going back a little bit to the adaptations, what was the experience like? How involved were you in the process of adapting your stories to the screen?
Almost not at all. Some a little bit more than others, but virtually. For instance, the showrunner for The Flight Attendant is a wonderfully talented man named Steve Yockey. And I think we might have had 2 conversations before they started filming. And they were basically about my feelings about the ending of the novel versus how it seemed to me they should consider ending the novel if they wanted a season 2 or a season 3. And he was so many steps ahead of me already. Secondly, I think we talked a little bit about my flight attendant's nemesis, the Russian oligarch's daughter in the novel, and how, based on a show like Killing Eve, it would be great if her story arc could continue into season 2. And again, Steve was miles and miles ahead of me.
Interesting. So you brought up again, like tweaking the ending for a TV show. So when you're writing your novel, what is your writing process like? And do you start with what your ending is going to be? Because that is kind of where you're trying to get to. What is your writing process like?
Well, John Irving says you should never write the first sentence until you know the last. If I worked that way, I would have written 0 books. No, I would have written 1. I've written exactly 1 book where I knew how it was going to end when I started it. And that was 2007's The Double Bind. All my other books, I had no idea where they were going. I do not use an outline. I depend on my characters to take me by the hand and lead me through the dark of the story.
Oh, wow. How many times does your path in the story change? Like if as you're writing it and you think, okay, I'm on this kind of path, I think it might go this way. Actually, the characters are telling me otherwise. I'm gonna shift it. Like how many kind of revisions are you doing throughout that process?
A lot. Because I don't have an outline, and because I really do depend on my characters to lead me, they often surprise me. And if a character does something that makes absolute sense in the context of the narrative on page 150, I am perfectly fine going all the way back to the beginning and revising his or their arc so that decision on page 150 makes sense. My books tend to go through a lot of drafts. The Amateur is an exception. Usually my books go through 7 or 8 drafts before they're done.
Wow. That's so interesting. It echoes a lot of what I've heard from other writers too, of like the characters are speaking to you. You're not just like, oh, I want this to happen, I want that to happen. Like they really come through you and they speak to you in what's going to happen.
Yeah. And you know a book is problematic if characters are doing things that the author needs them to do, but they would not do organically.
I want to talk a little bit about your Armenian heritage and the Armenian community. So how has your Armenian heritage influenced your writing?
First of all, I take great pride in the fact that my great-grandfather was a troubadour from Kayseri and was in some ways, you might almost say, a Bruce Springsteen of the Anatolian plains in the 1870s, a prodigy who didn't simply write poetry, but he sang it as far in the Ottoman Empire to the southeast as Jerusalem and as far to the west as Constantinople. He was also a witness to the Hamidian massacres when they came to Kayseri and scattered the family. And his longest poem he ever wrote, I think it was 85 quatrains, was about that day on November 18th in Kayseri. So I take pride in the DNA. I take pride in the fact that I'm not even the first Bohjalian to try to make sense of the Armenian genocide in literature. I'm just the second. My great-grandfather wrote about it literally, good Lord. The Sandcastle Girls was published in 2012, so 117 years before me. Also, I have a bully pulpit as a novelist and as a columnist in newspaper, fundamentally as a novelist, that in turn gives me the opportunity to write op-eds for newspapers. And I take that bully pulpit really seriously. I did not write the Sandcastle Girls for our community because we know the story. We know what happened. It was our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who were either annihilated or against all odds survived. I wrote the Sandcastle Girls for all of my really wonderful readers in Joplin, Missouri, and Phoenix, Arizona, and Tampa, Florida, who couldn't find Armenia, much less a place like, Aleppo, Syria, or Gaziantep, or Kars on a map. That's who I wrote the book for. And that's why it is such an important legacy book for me. And I had people telling me, when I told them in 2010 that I was starting a book about the Armenian genocide, and they begged me not to do it. Because they said, this is an absolute career killer. You're A, writing about genocide, and B, you're writing about a genocide that no one has heard of. And I said, that's more the reason why I really want to do it. And it speaks volumes about my editor, Jenny Jackson, that I remember telling her when I was at Penguin Random House one day in 2010 that, okay, next book, love story, set amidst the Armenian genocide. And her immediate reaction was this: that sounds fantastic and important, and you are just the person to write that book. I can't wait to see where you go.
Wow. That's amazing. I think you touched on a few very important things here. I keep saying this as well, in that we often, as Armenians, are only talking to ourselves. Our events, the art we make, a lot of times it's just to other Armenians, which is great. We need that, but also if we want people to know what the Armenian genocide is, or know if any of the innovations and accomplishments that our people have had for thousands of years, we need to be talking to everybody else too. And you said you're the second Bohjalian to write about the Armenian genocide, which I think speaks to the fact that pretty much every Armenian artist, I think, at some point creates some piece of art about the Armenian genocide, because there is that kind of unresolved trauma that you need to express and process in some way, that especially as an artist you feel that. So with the Sandcastle Girls, why did you want to write it as a historical fiction, and that love story versus a more gritty, like historical account, like a more truthful historical account of your grandparents' story? I'm not saying one is better than the other or anything like that, but that form of storytelling.
I must have, no exaggeration, 80 memoirs by survivors or children or grandchildren of survivors. Of those 80, all but 2 or 3 are self-published and were read by very, very few people.
Mm-hmm.
There are the few exceptions, books like Black Dog of Fate by Peter Bohjalian, or Eric Bogosian's Operation Nemesis.
Mm-hmm.
But most first-person memoirs of the Armenian genocide are only read in our community. I wanted to make sure that this book was read outside of our community. So I love the way you use the word love story. This book is that sort of its elevator pitch. It's a love story set in the First World War, involving an American, and that's important, an American woman who goes to Aleppo to try to bring aid and succor to the Armenian refugees there, where she meets an Armenian looking for his family who have been swallowed by the genocide. The title is another, well, forgive me, bait and switch. You use the word gritty. I could have said 1.5 million dead in the desert. We're going to run our fingers through the sand in Der Zor and find the fragments of human bones. But instead it's called The Sand Girls. And when you look at the cover, and most of the foreign editions replicate in some way the American edition, it is a woman with a parasol in a white dress looking out at what we know is Der Zor. But to the reader, it's simply some Middle Eastern place that needs some vegetation. When Doubleday got really excited about the book, and God bless them, they did, they said we're going to publish it in July. And so I know that July is where literary fiction goes to die. It is the big beach book month. So I gave it the title, The Sandcastle Girls. Sandcastles, do figure into the text. It's not a complete wild card. But I also knew that somebody picking up the Sandcastle Girls at Hudson News at O'Hare, or at Barnes and Noble in Union Square, or at the Harvard bookstore in Cambridge, aren't going to pick it up and say, oh, 1.5 million dead in the desert. I'm not going to read this on vacation. And it worked. It spent months on the bestseller list, hardcover and paperback. And that is a testimony to the bait and switch as much as it is to any of my literary talents.
No, that's very interesting, though. How do you think, book marketing or, the reader has changed since you wrote your first book or your first 5 books to now, in terms of how you promote your books, how you title your books, how you talk about them out in the world?
My first book was published in the Mesozoic era. When my first book was published, there were no social networks. There were magazines and newspapers, almost all of which had dedicated book pages. So when my first book was published, there's a book party in New York City, and maybe if you're a slightly bigger author, you go to a few other cities, and newspaper editors take it from there. Now there's very little book review coverage. Just this year, the Washington Post discontinued their book coverage. Wow. So now we depend far less on reviews and far more on dancing on TikTok. We depend far less on reviews and far more on Substack. We depend less on reviews and far more on giveaways on Goodreads and bookstagrammers and book talkers and influencers who get the word out about the book. Even book tours have gone from massive. In the middle of my career, I would do 3-week book tours.
Oh, wow.
Now I do a book tour of no more, absolute max, of 11 days. And it's a lot harder. The previous incarnations of book tours were really glamorous. The current incarnation of a book tour is kind of like Willy Loman. And I always feel like I'm like the salesman who's about to be done.
Well, with that, tell me a little about your new book, The Amateur, and what readers can expect from it.
What if one moment, wild, weird, traumatic, completely changed your life? The Amateur is about that. It is wildly autobiographic. I wrote it in a 90-day alchemic frenzy. It is a pretend memoir from Mira Winston, a novelist my age who's known best for books about alcoholic flight attendants and midwives on trial for manslaughter. But once upon a time, when she was 18 years old, she thought she had the LPGA in her sights. She was a golf prodigy. But one August day, she drives a golf ball through the practice net at her Swank Country Club outside of New York City, instantly killing a classmate and caddy. And instead of going to Yale and then hopefully the LPGA, she's going to punk rock clubs in the East Village. And her life increasingly unravels until suddenly she is actually on trial for involuntary manslaughter. I am both the dead and the person who kills the caddy. I caddied for Summers. So I am both Kenny Foster, the person Mira Winston kills, and I am Mira Winston, which is why I think I was able to write this book with so much velocity.
Wow.
I was dealing with all of my own demons, my own guilt, my own magical thinking, and my summers on the golf course. It's not a book about golf. I love what somebody said. For a book about golf, there's almost no golf in this. And that's because Mira Winston is so traumatized after killing a caddy that she says, I'm done. And she never plays golf again.
That sounds so fascinating. And I feel like a lot of your books take readers into these very specific worlds and professions like flight attendants, midwives, homeopathic medicine, and now you're a little bit into professional golf and country clubs and caddying and a little bit into that world. So you said you were a caddy, but for the other ones, have those been natural areas of interest for you? Or what kind of research do you do to get into understanding what those worlds are about?
First of all, I love that you used the word profession. For so many human beings, we are what we do. And it drives me crazy when I'm reading a book and we don't get a sense of how the character feels about what he or she or they do for a living. We are what we do, for better or worse. It's a big part of our souls, especially if you do something you love. My aunt was a flight attendant. So certainly I had some background in being a flight attendant before I started that book, but I interviewed so many flight attendants. I must have interviewed 65 people when I was researching midwives, OBGYNs, nurses, anesthesiologists, moms and dads who had their babies at home, the medical examiner. For the Red Lotus, I interviewed so many ER doctors because I had to understand what an ER doctor really does during the day. And I don't know how many of you who are watching this watched The Pit about an ER in Pittsburgh. Oh my gosh, I love that. So I had a great time interviewing ER doctors. But yeah, I do my homework in the same way that I needed to research for the Sandcastle Girls, what Aleppo was like in 1915. I needed to know what the diplomatic envoys and councils would be doing in Aleppo in 1915.
I've also heard from a lot of writers that the research phase of writing a screenplay or a novel is sometimes the most fun, and you can get lost in the research and spend more time than maybe you need researching, a little bit of procrastination. How do you know when you've got what you needed, and you have enough to actually begin writing? Or do you start writing and then you're like, okay, I need to research this part and then continue? How does that work?
That's a great question. I'll usually do a couple of weeks of research to make sure the idea is viable. That's not always the case. I knew I was going to write the Sandcastle Girls from the minute I started writing. I didn't need to do any preliminary research because, as I've said, it's in our DNA, all that trauma, all that dread. But for a book like The Amateur, I needed to understand two things. What are the civil and criminal possibilities stemming from an accident at a golf club with a golf ball? And B, what are the legal precedents? Once I'd established that, I was able to start writing, and then I would simply stop when I didn't know what I was doing and needed to do some homework. And that's the case with most of my books. When I have writer's block, it's not because I have literal writer's block in the way we think of that term. It's because I don't know enough to finish a scene, and I need to do some homework. And if that means talking to an ER doctor, a flight attendant, or one of the great former editors of the Armenian Weekly, Dr. Hachig Muradian, about the Sandcastle Girls, I would pick up the phone and call Hachig or email Hachig, and he would direct me where to go, because Hachig is not simply my moral compass. I literally call him my godfather, even though I'm way older than he is. But he's so generous with his time and knowledge.
Wow. I love that. And I think you also touched on that framing of writer's block is so interesting, especially to other writers, of it's not necessarily like, oh, I can't write anything. It's you have to figure out why you have writer's block. What is it for you? And it could be that you don't have enough research. It could be that you're just scared. It could be some kind of procrastination. It could be a number of things. So I think that's a really great piece of advice too for addressing a writer's block. Many of your books, including The Amateur, have a strong but very relatable female protagonist. Why is that an important perspective for you to be incorporating in your books?
I love that you say relatable. So many times people say, so many of your books have so many dislikable characters. I prefer flawed or damaged.
And we all have flaws.
Or best of all, relatable. So many of my characters are the female versions of me. And that's partly because of the journeys on which I send them tend to demand an emotional depth and lack of repression that seems to mark men of my generation. As Mira jokes in The Amateur, the only reason why golf was invented was so that men would talk to each other. So that's why I think so many of my characters tend to be female. And just to go back to the Sandcastle Girls again. The Sandcastle Girls has fundamentally three main characters. The lovers in 1915, the American Elizabeth Endicott from Boston, and the Armenian from Von, Armin Petrosian. The third character is in the present day. It is a writer, a female version of me named Laura Petrosian. And Laura is a female version of me rather than just a male version of me, because I can't imagine a lot of men of my generation going on the emotional journey that will expose so much vulnerability that Laura is willing to go on based on simply seeing a photo at the Armenian Museum of America in Watertown that, based on the caption, seems to be someone who could be related to her.
It's a very interesting take on the character. I know a lot of people put themselves in the characters they write about, but being able to have that emotional depth is very interesting.
When my father was dying, over the course of the last year of his life, he was in Florida. I would fly down to Florida every 3 weeks from Vermont, sometimes every 2 weeks. And one of the times when I was chatting with his younger sister, also named Rosie, his younger sister, my Aunt Rosemary, said to me, "Oh, Chris, thank God my brother has you. You are the daughter he never had." Great compliment.
That is a great compliment. I also, as a girl and it's just my sister and I are the only kids in our family. We often joke about being the sons that our dad never had as we help him around the backyard, getting stuff ready for a party or, all the manual labor. So I hear a lot of that from women. I never hear that from men. So that's a great compliment.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so now it's time for High Takes, our lightning round on all things Armenian arts and culture. Are you ready?
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, so what's one piece of Armenian art that our listeners should check out?
Okay, Serge Tankian's paintings. Whenever we think of Serge, we go right to System of a Down and his amazing, amazing music. He had an opening of his paintings earlier this year at the Armenian Museum in Watertown, and he created the most incredible app with his music to go with the paintings. And I can remember in March, standing in the gallery, looking at his paintings, listening to the music and thinking, this is one banger of a great experience.
Oh, that's a great recommendation. What is one word that describes being Armenian to you?
Passionate.
One Armenian artist or cultural icon that inspires you?
Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb on this one. Sona Movsesian, Conan O'Brien's quote-unquote assistant, the woman who gave us the book, The World's Worst Assistant, and coming out this fall, The World's Worst Mom. And here's why I love Sona. I've never met Sona, but I do love listening to her on the podcast. She did something for our community that is incredible. When she brought Conan O'Brien to Armenia, it was not simply a presentation to the world of what a magnificent country Armenia is, so beautiful, how magnificent Yerevan is. But then you get to that ending where they go to the memorial, they go to the museum, and it is wrenching and heartbreaking. And I think that is one of the greatest gifts to the Armenian community from any living Armenian artist we have right now. It was just fantastic.
I second that. I've been to Armenia a couple times, but on this last trip, we rewatched that episode, rewatched the Anthony Bourdain episode with Serge Tankian for things to plan our trip around, because it was such a great episode and such a great demonstration of the country and the culture. So 100% agree.
And can I give a shout out to one other person?
Yeah.
May she rest in peace. Diana Derhovanesian, because of the work she did, not merely as a poet herself, but chronicling and consolidating, bringing together a history of Armenian poetry and Armenian poets.
Wonderful. Great addition. What is one piece of advice for aspiring writers?
Write what you love and write every single day that you can. Again, not wanting to give myself a pat on the back, but because I wasn't doing it except that I loved it. Even when I had a full-time job in advertising, I wrote every single day beginning at 5 a.m. in the morning before work.
Yep, that's what you got to do. You got to hustle.
And then the second piece of advice, after you are published, never, ever read your reviews on Amazon or Goodreads, because there lies the path to madness.
Oh my gosh, that's great advice. Yeah. And finally, what is one thing that you wish the world understood about Armenian culture?
I'm going to give you two. Number one, Armenian cuisine. which is absolutely spectacular. And number two, Armenian architecture. Every time I am visiting an Armenian church in Armenia, every time I am visiting the ruins of Armenian civilization in Western Armenia, in places from Kars to Musada, throughout Anatolia and Cilicia, I am reminded, or when you're looking on the in Istanbul, when you're looking at so many of the magnificent buildings on the Bosphorus, Armenian architects and Armenian architecture has been crushing it since the early Middle Ages.
Yes, 100%. These were great. These are such varied takes. I love it. You've hit on so many different aspects of culture. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. This was such a wonderful conversation.
I had a blast, Rosie. Thank you for your great questions and thank you for your faith in my work. I bow before you in awesomeness.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you.